This is where Lou Edna Jones's house was.
Oh, it's an empty lot now.
Yeah, they knocked it down, I guess.
Wow.
Yeah, big lot, isn't it?
It's huge. It's a big corner lot.
Tom Daly is a retired arson investigator with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives.
So in December of 2003, after we asked the area departments and whatnot to go through their files, Frankie Molino from DC Homicide called me up and said, Tom, we need to look at something. And we drove over here, and Frankie and Tony Exline went up on the porch and cut the indoor-outdoor carpeting off the porch. And then we took it to the lab, and at 15 times magnification, we could see that there was a plastic remains of a jug and black plastic. And so that fire here was linked to the serial arson case.
Tom is driving me around parts of Virginia, D.C., and Maryland to point out locations that the D.C. serial arsonist set on fire over 15 years ago. Tom's not using Waze or a map. He doesn't even have addresses written on paper. This is all from memory, from hours spent at each of these locations during almost a 2-year investigation to capture what some call the most prolific serial arsonist in U.S. history. This is the first season of Arson. I'm McGuirk-Allison. In this podcast, we introduce you to the talented team of arson investigators who dedicated 22 months of their lives to capturing a horrific villain. Brought to you by the International Association of Arson Investigators in cooperation with ATF, we've gained access to people and details about the case not shared before now. It's a story of dedication, of frustration and victories that culminates into an eventual win for law enforcement and the community, but not after much destruction and tragedy. Lou Edna Jones was known as Mama Lou in her neighborhood. An 86-year-old grandmother on Evart Street, she was a pillar in her community. She died in June 2003 as a result of the person lighting these fires.
She was up in the back bedroom, and he had set the front door on fire, and then, the fire went up the stairwell, I think.
Right.
And Tom says that's what likely killed her.
The fire starter has struck again, the second time in just 2 days, and tonight...
At this point, summer of 2003, officials didn't know what they were dealing with, or that the number of fires would grow into the hundreds. I first met Tom at his home just outside D.C., in an adorable neighborhood of mid-century houses. He's now retired from the ATF. We taped our interview downstairs, where I gave him a small gift, a hat that said crew from the Naval Academy. He currently coaches rowing at Gonzaga, a private Jesuit boys' school in D.C.
2000, I had been with ATF. I've been in law enforcement about 16 years and have been with ATF about 12, 13. And in 2001, we had the terrorist attacks at the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. And I was a member of the Northeast National Response Team for ATF and was deployed to the Pentagon for probably the better part of a month or more. And then 2002 in September, we was part of the initial response with ATF to Montgomery County for the serial sniper case with John Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malveaux. And then no sooner was that over with, that in June of 2003, we began a 22-month journey with the D.C. serial arson case. sort of 3+ years, I guess, of high drama.
The kind of drama that put the entire DC area on edge. It was one terrifying event after another that started with 9/11.
What we're looking at now is this enormous gap in the building that has been opened by the explosion.
Followed by mailed anthrax that poisoned 17 people and killed 5.
The U.S. House of Representatives is closing offices today until Tuesday to allow a complete sweep for traces of anthrax. And 29 staffers.
And then in 2002, the Beltway snipers killed 10 people and injured 3 in completely random and senseless attacks.
Terrifying situation for thousands of people. Gunmen in the neighborhood killing individuals in a methodical way. When the news got on the radio and the television, people were too frightened to go outside. It happened again.
And right on the
again.
heels of the snipers, a serial arsonist began lighting fires to doors and porches outside of homes while the people who lived there slept.
Tracy, my source is telling me investigators are confident this was the work of the serial arsonist. Based on the time, about 3 o'clock in the morning, the location...
To appreciate just how hard it was to find a suspect, you have to understand something about the geography. DC, Maryland, and Virginia are collectively known as the DMV. The boundaries between the 2 states and the district tend to blend together, especially for commuters. The Metro rail system stretches far into both states. While the Potomac River separates Virginia from Maryland, the line between the Anacostia neighborhood and southeast DC blends into the border of Prince George's County, divided by Southern Avenue. It's on the east side of this street that Captain Scott Hoaglander began to take notice of a pattern of fires in 2003.
We were running probably 2 fires a day on average. And we were very short-staffed. Two people on a 24-hour shift schedule. So we had 4 shifts. And basically, you just had enough time to run from one incident to the next. I mean, from an investigative standpoint, it was very hard.
And those fires were pretty much happening right along that Southern Avenue border. This is Scott Fulkerson, resident agent in charge of the ATF Richmond field office.
And in this case, that was what exactly happened, where in the spring of 2003, there was a series of fires that occurred in the Prince George's County, District of Columbia borders. And those fires were occurring to occupied single-family homes right along the border. Because you're only a street, one side of the street might be in the district, the other side of the street might be Prince George's County. That's on the eastern side of the District of Columbia because Prince George's County surrounds a large portion of the district.
I met Scott in his Richmond office. He's a tall guy and really young for having led this incredibly complex, sprawling investigation. 15 years later, this case was so important to him that even during a busy day, he still found time to talk with me.
And the way law enforcement, specifically back then, had worked is when you have different investigative agencies get together periodically in whatever forum that might be.
One of the things I learned in reporting this story is that typically fire jurisdictions, even ones that are physically only separated by a road, don't regularly share cases and information. What happens on the DC side of Southern Avenue usually has nothing to do with what happens on the PG County side. But believe it or not, it was a chance encounter between Captain Hoaglander from PG County and Sergeant Phil Proctor from DC Fire that brought these jurisdictions together.
So that's where their comparing of notes began. And then once they realized that they may have had a larger problem than what they originally thought, a conversation took place between Captain Hoaglander and our office in Baltimore, because the Baltimore Field Division of ATF is what had the area of responsibility for Prince George's County. A separate ATF office in the District of Columbia had the area of responsibility for the District of Columbia.
He just vaguely mentioned, very vaguely, mentioned that they were having a number of fires that were on front porches of single-family homes.
This is Phil Proctor.
And I mentioned to Scott that, we have a few as well. And I think my recollection, I was in the beginning stages of just trying to work through those case files to understand what was going on. And the only thing I had, again, was front porch fires.
We were having a discussion about fires set on, porches or exterior entrances to houses. And the feedback from the investigator in D.C. was, hey, I think we've had a couple of those too. Let me look at this and I'll get back to you.
And he said, oh, hey, okay, well, bring your case files tomorrow when you come back and we'll look at them. I said, okay. Didn't think much of it.
The next day, Proctor returned to PG County to show Hoaglander his case files. Little did he know the importance of what he held in his hands.
I go in and I open the doors. He's in there, but he's in there with a full-on group, working group, ATF, other investigators, officials, and I'm kind of taken aback, like, oh, wait a minute, And I'm like, Scott, I thought we were just going to come. He said, yeah, I know, but I had to let everyone know.
It's at this point that Proctor realizes the similarities in their cases are a much bigger deal. There's a pattern. Single-family homes being lit in the middle of the night with an incendiary device, usually at an egress, like a porch or a doorway.
I laid out the files, looked at their files, quickly understood, ooh, wait a minute. But even that, everybody was still attempting to understand what was truly going on.
As we started to look at this problem and the potential that it could be a lot bigger than we originally thought, I needed help. But unfortunately, I was new, and my experience with the ATF was not really there. In fact, I think I only dealt with them maybe twice before this. And I was new to the Fire Investigations Office, like real new. I had just graduated the police academy, not even a couple months before all of this started. So from a management standpoint and even investigator standpoint, I was brand new. I mean, couldn't be any newer. And we asked for help. I mean, it's that simple. There's no way either one of the departments at the time with the current staffing levels could have worked this case either by themselves or even together without help from an agency such as ATF.
Scott Fulkerson from ATF.
So that's when the conversations ensued between the Baltimore ATF office and the Prince George's County Fire Investigations Unit, and said, can we get together and maybe review some of these case files and see if there's any similarities or any evidence that may be potentially linking these fires together, other than the fact that they're occupied single-family homes, other than geography, and other than the fact that they're all these fires that they were looking at early on occurred between the hours of midnight and 4 a.m. So a window, which is a concern, a large concern, because that tends to be the time where folks are in their homes sleeping and at their most vulnerable. And obviously the fact that there are single family occupied homes was for a reason, because somebody, and we knew that, and that was a large concern for everybody involved, was that if somebody hadn't already gotten hurt, that somebody, great potential or a high potential for somebody to be injured as a result of these fire settings.
That little yellow house.
That's it.
So the house is very close to here, just down that road.
Oh yeah, I'll take you to it. We're on the extreme northeast end of the city. Okay, we're as far east as you can go. 3/4 of a mile from here, you'll cross into Prince George's County.
Wow.
Okay, at New York Avenue. This is New York.
Up here in the corner.
Yeah, it's 83rd Street. He set that house on fire, or that house. But all we knew at the time, occupied single-family structure, middle of the night. This is what our guy does. But it's amazing how you buy into that anything else is not part of our case.
Right.
There were enough similarities between the fires to realize this was a serial offender terrorizing DC and PG County, attacking homes while families slept, one after the other. I picture those crime scene TV shows with the big walls of photos connected with red string. But at this point, they just have the pictures, with no apparent thread connecting the scenes. This was bigger than a single jurisdiction could investigate by themselves. So an official task force was assembled to find and catch the firesetter. It would be based in PG County and run by the ATF Baltimore field office. Eventually, it involved 15 different agencies across the DMV. Tom Daly was brought into the task force early on.
They quickly called me, I called Scott, and we had initially an informal task force of guys that we've worked together on so many cases. And then as the cases grew and the media got involved, and it became a much more formalized task force with members of all the area fire departments and police departments, fire chiefs and police chiefs, and the command staff of ATF standing up a formal federal task force that was initially housed in PG County at the Bureau of Fire Investigation. So that's how it all started.
We hope you're enjoying this segment of Arson, brought to you by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives and the International Association of Arson Investigators. If you're interested in learning more about a career in fire investigation, please visit cfitrainer.net. There you'll find over 20 profile interviews with current fire investigators in different stages of their careers and training modules that will help you become an investigator and help you in certification as you progress in fire investigation.
The National Fallen Firefighters Foundation honors the nation's fire heroes who make the ultimate sacrifice in service to others, and we need your help. Since 1992, we have been supporting fire families and departments with programs, services, and activities including the National Fallen Firefighters Memorial Weekend, survivor support programs, fire service training, and a national memorial park to honor fallen firefighters. We also work with the fire service community to develop and implement initiatives to reduce line of duty deaths. This is work we are passionate about, and we don't do it alone. Help us help the heroes. Learn more and donate at firehero.org.
The second half of 2003 saw dozens of fires from this unknown firesetter. And what the newly assembled task force didn't know was how utterly complex and bizarre this case would become. How solving this case would become a 24/7 job that would take over their lives. What they did know was that homes were being targeted in the middle of the night. The choices appeared to be random and without obvious motive. The one commonality was that the homes were all mostly in African American populated communities. And those communities were on edge. Who could be lighting these fires? How was the firesetter picking targets? Why was that person doing this? Was it just one person? And where would they strike next? Ms. Ida Collins McCoy's house was burned on November 11, 2003. She loved her home because it was on a big corner lot that backed up to the National Arboretum, a sprawling 446 acres of botanical beauty nestled into Northeast DC.
Luckily that my husband was home because I was tired and I was sleeping. He happened to come upstairs from the basement. And he woke me up to tell me to get up, that the house was on fire. And I was thinking that he had went in the kitchen and, left something on the stove. But he said, no, it's outside. And immediately I knew something was related to the arsonist.
Typical to the arsonist, the fire was set in the early morning hours.
Must have been around like 2:30 or so in the morning. Well, when I finally got myself together, I could see the blaze because my living room was near my front bedroom. And I saw the blaze, and of course he was trying to put it out, and I called 911 to report that my house had been set on fire.
Wow. And so the fire, I'm assuming, was set by the front door. Did you have a front porch?
Yeah, just a little small porch, yes.
And that's where he had put the device, was right by the door.
Yes.
But then ATF had to figure out if this fire was set by the serial arsonist or just a one-off.
And, some of the question was, was really uncomfortable, asking like if maybe somebody had something against us, which, I always wondered, why and who would do something like that.
The why and the who was something the task force could not answer in the fall of 2003. Despite hundreds of tips and leads, they were still reaching for more details about the firesetter. Who could do these horrific acts and go unseen? A typical firesetter is a young white male who may be out for revenge, like for a lost job. Sometimes fire setting is done for financial gain, like an insurance payout on a car. A serial arsonist is someone who habitually lights destructive fires, 3 or more, and has a cooling off period in between. None of this seemed to fit the profile of the DC firesetter. Ron Tunkel is a retired arson profiler whose career started with ATF. He stays really busy these days and is getting ready for a move, but we found time to connect on the phone.
Standard CSI investigators and forensic experts and our national response team, which are probably the finest in the world at arson investigations, they look for clues at crime scenes, physical evidence, poor patterns, points of origin, the collecting accelerants. If it's a homicide and involves a shooting, they're going to collect spent shell casings. They're going to get the bullets from the deceased. They're going to look for DNA, for fingerprints. They're going to look at blood spatter patterns. All of that hard physical evidence necessary. What we as profilers tend to look for are the emotional clues, behavioral clues left behind at a crime scene.
According to ATF, a profiler assists in the identification, arrest, and prosecution of offenders by analyzing the behavior of suspects. Tunkel had been with ATF since 1987. Ron's years of experience as a profiler at Quantico made him the right person to help the task force figure out the who and the why behind this mysterious firesetter. Late in spring 2003, he got a call from one of his mentors in the profiling field.
He said, "Hey, Ron, there's something interesting up here in D.C., and we've identified what we think is a serial arsonist. And I'd like you to come up and go with me to a meeting." I said, "Sure, yeah." And so there were a lot of meetings in the beginning, and I looking at my notes, which I'm copies of my notes. We're glad to keep our training materials. So pretty much early on, and I think this was like late June, they had come up with this concept of this series in April. But I think I met up with them either May or June. And then in July, I just started writing a profile based on my observations and thoughts. So,
it was Ron's job to give an educated assessment of the firesetter.
all right, what's the gender?
Right.
Who is this? Is it a woman? Is it a male?
Everyone had their own idea of who the firesetter could be. Tom Daly.
I didn't know. I thought it was just some goofy guy in the neighborhood, and that we would catch him in a couple of weeks sitting down there off of Southern Avenue with the normal band of guys that work all these cases, and, you know, maybe community member or, you know, a narcotics detective or some guy in the law enforcement or fire community would point us in the right direction, and within a month we'll catch him. Couldn't have been more wrong. But, you know, as far as a type of person, I mean, you know, we knew the kind of profile would be white male and, you know, maybe late 20s, middle age, something like that, angry, or, you know, some type of mental problem or something. That was, generally speaking, the thought process. But, you know, in truth and fact, though, again, you're developing a hypothesis based on the data collected. You know, it's data, you know, collection, identification of problem, collection of data, development of hypothesis.
So Ron Tunkel, the profiler from Quantico, helped the team develop their hypothesis based on the facts of this case.
Let's narrow the field by 50%. And, you know, at the time, based on research, most serial arsonists are male. I know it's close to 90% in our studies are male.
Right.
Now, mind you, there are females. And I teach and show interviews with several females. But I thought it was a male. And part of the thing that tipped me into that, this guy is operating late at night in neighborhoods. Some of the neighborhoods, maybe a woman would not feel so comfortable walking around late at night. The next thing was race.
And Ron, who was white, had an atypical opinion about the potential race of the firesetter.
So I said, based on the victimology and the fact that it blended into that area, I said he was African American. And there's nothing. Somebody said, "Oh, you're a racist." It's no. I'm remembering some sociology professor called my headquarters and said, "Oh, that guy's wrong. Majority of serial arsonists are white." And that's when I just retorted, "Yeah, because the majority of the American population is white." So again, that had us looking at a race. I opined that he was African American. Now everybody always says, well, the majority of serial arsonists are white. So what we need to look for is, one, the area of offending, and two, the victimology. Now we can never forget, and I'll repeat this several times, violent crime tends to be intraracial in nature. The majority of these victims were African American in the African American community. And then another thing, we talk about an arsonist working in an area of comfort zone. And this offender had operated there for a long time without being noticed. He blended in. Right. He fit in. And I went there one night, deep in the middle of the night, with some detectives, and I stood out. I was noticed, you know?
Tom Daly had to admit that assumptions were challenged.
We knew that all the reported fires we had, as far as June 2003, were all in African American communities. And so we surmised that for a guy not to stand out in the middle of the night, there was a good chance, that it may not be a white guy. It could be a black guy, but we didn't know. I mean, when we went through that scenario all the time, we just don't know. I mean, and you have to admit that. You have to admit you don't know, because whether you want to admit it or not, you don't know. You only know what you know when you get the evidence for it. The rest of it is just assumptions.
So Ron Tunkel was able to help narrow down the identity of the who. The why would remain a mystery until the very end. Teresa Gannon is professor of forensic psychology at the University of Kent in the UK.
I've come across people who've set fires. The traditional reason is they're really interested and fascinated with fire. They're really angry with someone. They're trying to get them back. They are trying to cry for help or trying to draw attention to their own need in some way. I've dealt with people who have set fire to their own front doors because it was an easier way to gain access to their house. People who've set fire to cars to cover up evidence. People who've set fire to other people to get rid of them, gain revenge, or to dispose of a deceased person that they've been involved with killing, to cover up a burglary, to gain recognition in society and to come along and, be the saviour. There are so many different reasons. I probably can't even list them all, but that's why I find firesetter so fascinating.
So you list all those motivations, and we all have experienced in our lives anger or resentment or fear or needing a sense of power. What is different about people who actually go one step further and become fire setters? Is there something different with them psychologically that, for me, I would know that's not the right thing to do, but why are some of these people able to make that leap and be destructive?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And that was a question myself and colleagues asked ourselves, nearly a decade ago now, in 2012, when I was essentially a clinician working with these people. And I realised that actually there was no theory to explain why someone would use fire as opposed to just stab someone or do something else, for example, if they get angry or fed up with their neighbour or whatever it is.
Teresa and her colleagues developed a theory called the multi-trajectory theory of adult fire setting. Basically, it says that as children, most of us learn the right ways to use fire.
So we may have developed an appropriate fire script, which is that you use fire to make a room look nicer, or you burn candles on a shelf because it brings about a feel of warmth and coziness. But we argue that some people, from their developmental experiences, develop an inappropriate fire script. So, for example, somehow, either by accident, incidentally, or on more purposefully, they learned that fire is a really good way to cope with all manner of things that happen to them.
For example, Teresa says, think of a neglected child who accidentally sets the carpet in their bedroom on fire.
They learn that very quickly, mum and dad come running, and there's lots of attention given to them. So you can see that for a child who perhaps has poor communication skills or other problems, that can very quickly become a kind of powerful tool that they use throughout their life.
The why or the motive of the DC fire setter is unclear and potentially complicated. With so many different possible motives, the path to the answer is unpredictable. And at this point in 2003, with dozens of fires being set, no one has any idea how long it's going to take to figure out who is the elusive fire setter. On September 13th, 2003, Only a few months after Hoaglander and Proctor realized there was something really big and horrible happening in D.C. and Prince George's County, a possible break. According to files obtained through ATF, around 3 a.m., 3 boys returned to their home on Anacostia Avenue. They'd been working at a place called the Mad Chef on Central Ave. They pulled up to their house, and there's a strange man sitting on their stoop. Months of following up on leads, combing through hours of video surveillance. The paths to a potential suspect seemed so far away, but at this moment, for the first time, an answer to who this firesetter could be seemed closer. Tom Daly.
So when I pulled up, Scott was already here, and I said, we have to pull all the strings on this. We've got a sighting, we've got 3 eyewitnesses, we have physical evidence. This was our biggest break ever in the case.
Next time on Arson.
They found a trash bag with a fully loaded device in it. And they took the device and walked across here to the sewer and threw it in the sewer.
For the first time, the investigators had eyewitnesses and an actual, intact, unburned incendiary device. But it would be almost 2 years before they learned who had left it. Arson is brought to you by the International Association of Arson Investigators in cooperation with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Our executive producer is Scott Stevens. Our editor is Tracy Wall. Arson is produced by Platform Media with help from Emily Vaughn and Mariah Dennis. Engineering support from Andrew Chadwick. Our theme music is by The Last Knife Fighter. You can learn more about the International Association of Arson Investigators at firearson.com and ATF at atf.gov. I'm Cara McGuirk-Allison.